Hello guys, I'm John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and welcome back one more time to Mr. Robot Season 4. It's not only the season's finale, it's the show's finale in a final two-parter that contains so many things that I need to talk about. I made notes while watching this because there were so many things I need to address. And yeah, let's just dive right into it because I can't really do like a spoiler-free part for this since it's the finale. Let me just tell you, in case you haven't seen it yet and you're a bit curious, it's a fantastic finale. I think you're going to be very satisfied. It's very much in style with what the show does. There are a lot of final twists and turns, surprises. It's obviously very emotional, and yeah, I think you're gonna be happy. But yeah, let's jump right into the details for this episode, so let's go. Okay, so the first note I made was already one of the happiest things that happened in this season. I wrote down, Elliot is talking to us again. That made me so happy when the episode opened with Elliot addressing us again, being like, oh, hello friend, have you been there this entire time? I'm sorry I was so focused on the hag. And I'm like, yes, I'm still here. I've been listening. I've been waiting for you to talk to us again. And it's just, it's great that they at least decided to have Elliot talk to us again in the series finale. It's great and had a lot of impact since we haven't heard his voice talking to us for like 11 episodes, and it was great that we brought that back for the finale. Very fitting, since the show also opens with Elliot talking to us, saying hello friend, and this whole hello friend spiel dialogue stuff gets picked up again, and lots of references and reworkings of past monologues appeared in this, and I like that a lot. I'm going to talk about that probably at another point as well. So yeah, I was happy that we heard Elliot's voice, and he said something quite interesting in the beginning. He says, "We're here, so where's Mr. Robot?" He was like, "Okay, so you're back. It doesn't mean Mr. Robot's gone." And for a second, I was like, "Oh, interesting point," because we wake up alongside Elliot, but Mr. Robot isn't there, even though he was there when the whole power plant exploded. So I was like, well, let's just see what happens. The next thing I wrote down, cool 80s intro song. In general, the music, of course, was brilliant again. I especially like the use of like the more quote-unquote modern songs, but like, you know, this opening song was like a cool 80s retro song. I like that also, like, because it talks about like Mr. Robot, and it was very fitting for this opening. The episode opens with quite a heavy moment already. Right after Elliot wakes up, he walks down the street and he sees the shop of his father. Like, he sees the Mr. Robot shop, and immediately alarm bells went off in my head. I was like, oh shit, is he gonna meet his dad again? And then there was a sentence Elliot said that like hit really hard. He wrote down, he said, "My monster is still alive." And I was like, what the fuck? Like, since we now know what happened between Elliot and his dad, and then he says that, I was like, oh shit. That must be so tough for Elliot to realize, I know that the man I've been trying to get away from ever since I was a child is still alive in this world. And I can't escape him. And when he said that, like, and specifically used the term monster, I was like, oh, this is heavy, like, what the fuck? I hit really hard. And then he wants to go into the shop, but then an interesting thing happens. He meets a girl on the street, and I was immediately reminded of like this dream thing we had, I think back in season 1, I'm not sure, where he tries to find his house and then it says 404 not found, and he meets the girl. Like, it was the exact repetition of that dream. And interestingly enough, she recognizes him. Like, she immediately says, "Oh, hello, Elliot." And obviously he's surprised and with things, well, maybe she can tell me what's going on, and asks about Darlene. And as we've already seen in the previous episode, Darlene isn't real in this alternate reality. And obviously that hits Elliot, and he tries to find out what happened, and decides to go into his dad's shop. And I thought, what the fuck? Why would you do that? Okay, so he runs home. That's where he actually meets the girl. I'm sorry, I kind of messed that up. Yeah. So he meets the girl when he gets out of the shop and tries to find his home. That's where he meets the girl as he's standing in front of his own home, and his mother comes out. And I was like, oh, holy shit, he actually interacts with his family? And they seem to recognize him. They seem to think there's this, as I called him last time, fancy pants Elliot. It was quite weird because I felt the same as Elliot did. I'm like, oh, his mother's actually a really nice person. This is like super awkward. And yeah, like they go inside, and this is where I started to like get a super creepy vibe. Like I wrote down, why is everything ever so slightly creepy? I don't know, because everything seemed like too perfect, which is, as we find out, the whole shtick of this thing. Like everything feels too nice, too perfect, and I got this proper vibe when Elliot meets his mother and is invited to his house, and I was like, something doesn't feel right. I know you're not supposed to be a nice person. I know his dad is not supposed to be alive and all that. So weird. And yeah, alongside Elliot, we basically see what is different, what's changed, how the people are in this reality. And Elliot comes up with an interesting idea. Like he thinks, well, if their past has changed, has mine as well. It's like he talks to his mother and kind of realizes, oh, so my family's different, Darlene isn't here. And he also gets told about Angela, that he's supposed to marry her. And what I like about that is that you can see that while it confuses him, it also obviously kind of excites him, because he likes Angela a lot. And when he gets told that he's supposed to marry her, you can see him being like, oh well, this is nice. Like I kind of like that how Rami Malek always manages to, in a like very subtle way, convey those emotions, where you can see in his expression that even though he tries to like push it down a bit, he's still kind of excited about that. So he talks to his mother and wonders, okay, so what about all the past things that happened to me, all the past trauma? And he remembers the window in his bedroom. And his bedroom is in another place. And the window isn't there, or like wasn't smashed. And what I noticed is that he gets into his old room, and it looks almost exactly like his flat later does. Like the layout was exactly the same, which I thought was interesting. Like, you know, the bed in the middle, and the desk with his computer on it to the right side of it. I kind of like the parallel there, that it looked similar. And he has a quite emotional conversation with his mother, and I thought that was a very intense, heavy moment when he asks her if she has ever hurt him, or if his dad has ever done anything. And I thought it was such a well-acted moment. Like, you could feel how hard that is for Elliot, because it's obviously already hard for him to ask his mother if she's ever hurt him, because he knows that she actually did. But when he like moves on to his father, he can't even quite finish the sentence, because you see, it just, even though he knows what has happened, it's still like almost not quite in his head yet what has actually happened to him. And you can see that it's hard for him to having to ask this question, especially having to ask this question to someone who is involved in the whole abuse he's gone through. So yeah, this whole conversation with his mother was, whew. Okay, so afterwards he decides to go and see Angela, because obviously he's very anxious and excited about that, because she's supposed to be dead, but she's not in this world, and they're supposed to get married. And he shows up at her place, and I thought it was kind of funny. Knocks at the door, and Philip Price opens, like Angela's dad. And I kind of liked the conversation, because it was so stereotypical, like, because he was like, "Ooh, intimidated by your father-in-law already." And I don't know, I just thought that was kind of funny, this little conversation that they had. And yeah, he goes into Angela's flat. She isn't there, but her parents are. And they have a slightly awkward but like relatively easy-going conversation. And there were some little things in there that I thought were quite funny. Like when Angela's mum says, "Oh, I'm so glad you finally found someone that's so nice. Her taste in men wasn't always great." And you can see Elliot going for one, and then he says, "Yeah, you're right." And I thought, "Oh, come on, Elliot." I don't know. I just thought it was kind of funny. So yeah, they talk a bit about the wedding, and Elliot sees like a bunch of pictures on a wall of him and Angela being like a happy couple, having a normal, happy life. And that's the sort of kind of the first time we're getting told or getting hints of this being a fantasy world, because Elliot says, "I've seen these pictures before. They are like what I've always dreamed about, what my fantasy is." And this is where I thought, oh, this is where we're getting the first hint, because he outright says, "This is what I've always dreamed about. This is the fantasy I've always had. Those pictures." So that's the first time I realized, okay, maybe we are actually in like Elliot's head or something, or in a fantasy. And I like that there are like those little hints throughout the episode. And then something cool but also slightly creepy happens that gave me the shivers, because I thought it was cool. Price's phone rings and he's like, "Well, Elliot, you're calling me right now. How is this possible?" And obviously Elliot gets super confused and panics and it's like, "Give me the phone, give me the phone." Picks up the phone, and I wrote down, "Holy shit, he hears his own voice." I don't know why that got to me so much, but that gave me shivers for a second. When you hear Fancy Pants Elliot's voice on the other side, and I was like, "Oh shit, Elliot!" And like, I don't know, there was like shivers of excitement, but it was also ever so slightly creepy. And then this whole earthquake thing happened again. Like stuff flies around. Angela's mum cuts her hand on the glass, what we saw in the previous episode, since we saw the bloody glass in the dustbin. And yeah, so that's what happened, and Elliot obviously like freaks out, wants to know what's going on, and tries to find out what's with that other Elliot version, and goes to his place. Like, he still has his keys, they fit in the lock, everything fits as it should be, and he obviously begins to question himself. He's like, "Can there be two Elliots? Like, who is this guy? Is he like me? Who is he?" I kind of like the first reaction he has as he gets into the flat and he sees how fancy it is. The first thing he says, "Well, this guy's definitely not me," which is quite telling given the fact what we find out later. But let's move on. So he looks around the flat, looks at stuff that's different, and he eventually finds that folder that we have seen previously, which is the one where Elliot usually keeps like all the CDs with the music on it, like where he keeps all his data. And it's a normal photo album. Like, he sees how normal and happy his family life seems to be, which immediately to Elliot is like super confusing, and he starts looking things up on his laptop, on Elliot's computer on desk, because he's like, "Well, this can't be, like, this guy can't be this happy, no one can be this nice, no one, like, there must be something wrong." Like he says, "Haven't you been paying attention? Everyone has a secret, everyone has a monster." And again, when he says that monster, I'm like, oh, stop saying that, it hits me. And yeah, like, he looks through the computer, through the data, and he finds something that's encrypted. He's like, "Ah, bingo, there we have the secret." And he decrypts it, and it turns out that Fancy Pants Elliot has been keeping like sketch drawings of our Elliot, like proper hoodie Elliot, Darlene, the people from F Society. Like, there are all kinds of sketch drawings from characters that we have met in the show. And Elliot basically came to a conclusion I sort of had as well. Like, he freaks out and thinks, "Well, why does this guy know who I am? Why can he draw me?" And he says, he says something along the lines of like, is he also a hacker? Does he hack my world? And then he says again something that has to do with monsters, and I think it was something like, am I his monster? And even though I didn't know yet at that time, at that point in the episode, what the conclusion was gonna be regarding the personalities, I thought, oh, well, that's heavy. And given the fact what we know by the end of the series finale, it's quite interesting, because you could argue that Elliot is Elliot's own monster. If you think about it, like, Hoodie Elliot is kind of normal Elliot's monster, because, well, Hoodie Elliot is, as we find out, not the core personality. He's just the most dominant one, and he has locked normal Elliot away knowingly. And we even get this almost right to the very end, almost to the very end, that Elliot willingly and knowingly shuts out proper Elliot. So in a way, he is kind of his monster, because he doesn't allow proper normal Elliot to come out and be himself. Like, he created this world for him and has become this sort of monster who's taken over his life. So you could argue in a way that Hoodie Elliot is normal Elliot's monster. So the next thing I wrote down is in all caps, "They meet!" Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. I mean, I already knew this would happen, since this is how the previous episode ended, but oh god, this whole meeting scene when they finally get together, and shivers, excitement. And also I just love it when a good actor gets like to play a double role, and of course Rami Malek does a brilliant job. You can see the different nuances in those Elliots. And when they sit down to talk, it's so interesting. Like, this was one of the most interesting moments to me in the first part of this finale, because I just wanted to know what was going on with these two Elliots. Like, how would they handle seeing each other? What would they gather from each other's existence? And it turns out that Fancy Pants Elliot has basically made up Hoodie Elliot. So Elliot is sort of like Hoodie. Okay, we're gonna call him Hoodie Elliot and Fancy Pants Elliot. So Hoodie Elliot is sort of like this made-up hero who created this F society and wanted to save the world and all that. So it's kind of Fancy Pants Elliot fantasy of living an exciting life. What he mentions in the previous episode to Tyrell, because he thinks he has such a boring, repetitive life, he would like it to be more exciting, and thus he invented Hoodie Elliot in his head and made those sketch drawings of him and the people he met. And at that point, I was kind of starting to wonder, so is it all fake? Is Hoodie Elliot just an imagination? Is it not real? Is this all just made up by a Fancy Pants Elliot, and we've all been following a weird fantasy, imagination, dreamland sort of situation? I was kind of right, and also kind of wrong. And as the conversation goes on, Hoodie Elliot asks Fancy Pants Elliot if he really wants this life, and I thought this was quite an interesting part within their conversation, because I think it also kind of calls out the thoughts, I think, of we as fans or as viewers, or like we in general, we as people often have, that we like see cool people or think who cool people are, or imagine someone who's cool and think, oh, their life would be so exciting, or what I would like to be them. But you don't always know what's actually going on. Like with Hoodie Elliot, you would think, oh, cool, he's this sort of hacker vigilante who does all those cool things and meets cool and interesting people, and it's very exciting, and he saves the world. But as Hoodie Elliot rightfully like kind of hints at, he's like, do you really want this life? Do you know what I actually been through, and like how awful it is, with like not only the mental illness but with all the other stuff he goes through? And Fancy Pants Elliot says no, and quite harshly goes on to say, no, I wouldn't want to be this guy. Like he's all alone, and he doesn't seem like a happy person, and he's probably a bit of a loner, and he's not normal. And that like really hit home, and you can also see this in Hoodie Elliot's expression when he gets told that he's not normal he gets this told basically by himself. And Fancy Pants Elliot also has this sort of realization where he looks at him and is like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, because he sees that he's basically been telling this, not only himself, but also this version of himself that he himself made up. And what's almost even worse is that Hoodie Elliot agrees. Like within his narration to us, he says, you know, he's right, I'm not normal. But then something quite interesting happens. Fancy Pants Elliot says, did you hear this? There was a noise. And I immediately wrote down, what the fuck, can he hear Elliot's narration? And turns out, yes. Yes, he can. Not only is Hoodie Elliot now able to talk to us, Fancy Pants Elliot notices that something within Elliot's head is going on as he talks to us. And I just completely freaked out in that moment, because I thought, oh shit, is Fancy Pants Elliot gonna do something with that? Is he gonna talk to us? Is he, like, I don't know, because there were so many implications in the fact that he can hear Elliot's narration, and it's usually very exclusive to, like, you know, us and Elliot. And when someone else notices that, or is aware of it happening, you get kind of frightened, because you think, oh shit, this is not a secret safe space anymore. And very understandably, Fancy Pants Elliot starts questioning things. Both Elliots are getting confused and freak out a bit, and well, another earthquake happens, and Fancy Pants Elliot falls over and hits his head. And I wrote down in all caps, holy shit, did Elliot just die? And damn, like, I did not see that coming. I was freaking out, even though I knew that, you know, this was probably all not real and there can't be two Elliots at the same time. I was still like, oh shit, did one of the Elliots just die? What the fuck's going on? But as soon as that happened, and Elliot kind of stands there and looks down at him, I immediately thought, is he gonna let him die? Because he starts thinking about his life and all that. And I immediately came to this idea that Elliot probably wants to take over this guy's life, especially when he gets a phone call, and, well, Fancy Pants Elliot gets a phone call, and it's Angela. And it was such an emotional and heavy conversation when Elliot tells Angela that he loves her, because he can just see how sad he still is about her dying. And with her now being on the other side of that line and hearing her voice, it's kind of that switch that makes him go, well, no, this is such a great opportunity, because, you know, even though I didn't like Angela personally as much as a person, a great character, but, you know, as a person, she wasn't like my favorite in the show, but you can see and feel how much Elliot feels for her. And when he tells her that he loves her, you know that he means, and how important this friendship, this relationship is to him. And it's very much understandable, but that this is sort of the switch that makes him go, okay, I have to do something if I want this to be the real thing. And this is when he decides to take over Fancy Pants Elliot's life. And at first I just thought, oh, he's just gonna let him die, because we can, like, see Fancy Pants Elliot lying on the floor bleeding and, like, pleading for help and being like, please, call someone, call someone. And Elliot just looks at him, like, stone cold looks at him, and I just thought, oh, he's gonna sit there and let him die. And basically, yeah, kills himself. But then, holy shit, in what I did not see coming, and even though I'm, you know, very much at ease, so to speak, with, like, violence on screen and all that, when he decides to literally kill himself, I was shocked. I was just, like, sitting there looking at my screen going, what the fuck is happening? Especially when he says, which I thought was such a genius idea, because it makes the whole thing even creepier when he says, "I think you should look away too," and the camera like moves away from Elliot as he bows down to Fancy Pants Elliot, and you just like hear them struggling in the background. I just, holy shit. Like the last shot of episode 12 is Elliot getting up, and we see his bloody hands, and we know what he's done, even though, you know, it's not real. But I just thought, what the fuck, Elliot? What did you just do? That was just absolutely horrifying. Even though it's like not a real person per se, like the implications behind it, the meanings, the symbolism, whatever. It not only does he kill a human being like in that moment, since also to him it's the real world. No matter that there's his family and another version of him, to him in this moment it's sort of real. And he also says you should look away because he knows that this is gonna be graphic, and this is probably one of the most shocking things Elliot has ever done. And you know, I support my boy. Like, I love my boy. I support everything he does. And like, when he did this, I was like, what the fuck, man? What the fuck? Like, also because you don't see it. He says, look away. I always like this idea when you sort of can't see the violence that's actually going on, because in your head it seems much worse. And yeah, just the fact that he's not prepared to kill someone, he's killing himself to take over a life that he wants. Like, again, it's this implication that we get later. We hear the explanation for. He basically kills proper Elliot because he wants to take over his life, because he wants to be the dominant personality. He wants to take charge, and he's willing to literally kill himself over it. And oh my god, that was just, when I finished the episode, I was just so fucking shocked and done. Especially since he like looks at you at the end, and also at the beginning of the last episode, he looks at you and says, please don't judge me. You don't have to do this. And I was like, you know, I felt like I can't really judge you because I understand why he did it. It's just like so heavily with me when I watched this, and I know I'm talking for a long time about this moment, but it was just so heavy. Like, I literally had to sit there for 2 minutes before I could switch on the next episode, because I was like, what the fuck have you done, Elliot? Like I said, even though you know at this point, or suspect at that point, that's not real, it's still just, the more you think about it, the more effed up it gets. Okay, but let's move on to the final episode. It picks up right after Elliot has basically killed himself. You have this sort of, because I noticed that you have this sort of creepy string music going on, which I thought was very cool, because it carries over the tone of the previous scene with the murder and everything, as he goes into the street to find Elliot's car. And yeah, it had this whole shivers creepy vibe, which later transitions into like this cool, nice, fancy, I think French opening song, which I thought, you know, cool, nice song. And yeah, we're in the car, which I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the same car Elliot woke up in season 1 or 2, after he's presumably killed Tyrell. You know, I think that's the same car, or did it just look like it? I don't know. Like, that was my thought, and I thought, oh, is that the same car? Interesting. Like, what does it mean? And yeah, so he gets in the car and tries to get rid of the body. He tries to get rid of himself, which is so weird. Like, when he gets the box and he basically wraps himself up in the box, his own dead body. again, I thought all the implications, the meanings behind this is just, I don't even want to think about it at this point. And like, I the whole time I just thought, you know what, I'm supporting you, Elliot, because I like you so much, but I have no idea what the fuck you're trying to do at this point. I don't know if it's a good idea. But I was kind of happy when it put on the tuxedo, because that man looks good in a tux. You just have to say that. And when he puts on the tuxedo, that's when we meet Mr. Robot again. Like, the camera turns after Elliot says, I thought you would still be here, or something like that, and the camera moves, and then we see Mr. Robot, and I'm so glad he was still around, though. Like, of course, we couldn't finish the series without Mr. Robot. And I'm glad he was there, and I kind of like that at this point we get this, those sort of oppositions between the two. Because at this point, Hoodie Elliot, like, truly believes this is like an alternate reality. Like, he says, White Rose's machine work, we're like in an alternate better world, and it's cool, and I'm gonna take over this guy's life, and I'm gonna be happy. And you have Mr. Robot immediately questioning everything that's going on. And I like that we have like two oppositions with this. Also, I like that the show like plays with our perception again. Because I also kind of mentioned this in my previous review, since we weren't really sure, is this like a proper alternate reality though? And since this entire first part of the series finale does not really, or not too much, question what this world is, you might be led to believe that this is an actual like alternate reality. And I can see why Hoodie Elliot would believe at this point that this is real, since this is like what he's always wanted, especially with Angela and the whole wedding. And you can understand why he goes through with this, even though it becomes very like not really creepy. Well, I started to feel very unsure about the stuff Elliot was gonna do, and I didn't like where Elliot was going with all this, because I was like completely with Mr. Robot. I was like, this is too weird. Like, this can't be the thing, and this can't work. Like, he literally killed himself. He has to get rid of a body, and then he goes on to marry Angela, but he's not really the Elliot that she knows. I just thought this can't work, and I was to a certain degree freaked out by how, let's say, determined Elliot was to go through with this. Like, not only did he kill himself over this, like, but afterwards he like wants to wrap up a body, wants to go through with this. Like, he's so determined. And you're sitting there feeling, I know this is what you want, and this is what you probably also deserve, because you deserve to be happy. But there's a certain kind of unease I felt about the whole thing while watching it. So he wraps himself up in a box and tries to put himself in the car. And that's where he gets stopped by Dominique. She makes an appearance in this as a copper, as a policewoman. And I like that we got to see her in like a short moment. I like that she's still a policewoman, and she very rightfully calls Elliot out for the creepy, fishy stuff he's doing. And I thought, this is not gonna go well. Like, this just can't work. And yeah, like, the conversation obviously takes a turn. Everything goes pear-shaped, and she asks for his ID, and he thinks, well, I look like Fancy Pants Elliot, so I'm just gonna give him my ID. And she interestingly says, this is not you, this is Elliot Alderson. This is not you on the ID. And this is again one of the hints we get that Hoodie Elliot is not the same as Fancy Pants Elliot, or indeed not the same as like normal Elliot. I like that we like get this hint again, because you think, well, no, hang on, they look alike, they've been mistaken for one another. But like, after he kills him, I like that immediately after it gets called out by Dom that this is not Elliot. Because Hoodie Elliot is not Elliot Alderson. He's just a personality that looks like Elliot Alderson. And yeah. And yeah, Dom obviously finds out about that, asks to like open the box, and sees the body. And I wrote down, when everything was passionate, I wrote down shit like 10 times or something. So because obviously this couldn't work, and Elliot makes a run for it, and he runs into the tube, and very similar to the first episode, where we meet Mr. Robot for the first time, like on the tube we have Elliot and Mr. Robot only in the tube, and they have this very intense discussion, and Elliot tells Mr. Robot off, which I thought was quite intense and interesting, because I can understand why he does. Because, you know, Mr. Robot isn't always the nicest person in the room, and he hasn't always been the kindest man, but, you know, he's there to protect Elliot, and he wants only the best for him. But Elliot is so, let's say, delusional at this point, and he even tells Mr. Robot off. He's like, all I ever wanted was to be alone, like, you go away, I don't need you, basically like that, and he like, totally tells him off, and I thought, that hurt. Like, that hurt. Like, after all they've been through, after what Mr. Robot's done for him, to help him, then he tells him off like that because he wants this new life so badly. That just, that stung, you know? So then he makes his way to the beach, and as soon as you see, like, the wedding reception, I thought something's off. Like, everything seemed super creepy. Like, everyone wore the same clothes, and, like, had very creepy, unrealistic vibes. And as soon as Ella turns around, we see that things aren't, like, proper unreal, because everyone wears F-Society masks. And this is the point, like, if you didn't really have a suspicion before, this is the point where you think, okay, no, this can't be real, something is off, something's going on. And Mr. Robot comes in and gives him the hoodie of his tuxedo, and this is like when we notice for the first time, okay, this looks exactly like the dream, this delusional dream he had back in season 1. And this is also the point where Mr. Robot basically flat out tells him, this is not real, it's happening in your head. And I'm so glad that's what they did. Like, this is not really an alternate reality. That would have been quite something. But also, like, that they basically tell you throughout the whole thing, they like give you hints that this is not real, and they don't wait until the very, very end to tell you that this is all in his head. They decide to do it basically at the halfway mark of the final episode, so they still have some space to, like, have fun with in regards to how Elliot gets out of the alternate reality and gets back into the real world. So I like that it's not ambiguous. I like that we have hints in the beginning, and then we get flat out told what's going on, and we're getting an explanation for what's been going on. It's that Elliot, Hoodie Elliot, has basically been creating this loop, this fantasy world to keep him occupied. And this is when we finally find out what, like, this whole the other one means. And it's something I think all of us have kind of heard somewhere before or guessed. It certainly was something I thought was a very likely possibility that they were going to do it, and I think I'm glad that they decided to go with this. And it's basically that we find out that Hoodie Elliot is only another personality that basically Fancy Pants Elliot is the core personality. So I think I've mentioned this in my theory video as well, that there has been the suspicion that Hoodie Elliot's only another personality, but not the core. So the Elliot that was there from the beginning, the Elliot that was born, that did not have the ID until, like, the incident with the window, that's basically who this fantasy world, who this loop is for. Hoodie Elliot created this world in order to keep proper Elliot, the core personality Elliot, like, occupied in this happy world, because this is what he always wanted. This is his sort of perfect life. So everything starts to look more and more like the dream he's had. In season 1, Mr. Robot also mentions it. He says, you've slipped into this kind of dream before, shortly, while you were going through your withdrawal, which is what happened back in season 1, I think. So this is what starts to play out. Like, we have Elliot in a tuxedo but with his hoodie. We have Angela in her wedding dress and all that, back at the F-Society headquarters. All that plays out exactly like we've seen it before. and it all becomes quite creepy because like Elliot still doesn't really want to leave this world and runs after Angela, and Mr. Robot kind of takes over his head for a second, and every face starts looking like Mr. Robot, and I thought, okay, that's rather unsettling. And yeah, like we kind of switch around in Elliot's head and all the scenarios that we go through, what happens to him. We see Tyrell for a second, which I thought was kind of cool. I was like, oh my god, Tyrell, he's there. And he shoots Elliot, which I thought was quite interesting. You can think about what that means and the symbolism and all that. Like, I know, like, he's the one who shot Elliot, before, or has like threatened him with a gun before, because so I thought it makes sense that he's the one to shoot him. And then we see him dug in a grave, and Elliot like bloody and dirty and everything, like trying to crawl away, but Tyrell grabs him, like throws him in a grave and goes away, and Elliot is just lying there basically dead. And it switches around in his head, and all the kind of crazy stuff happens, and we get more and more like this deterioration of Elliot's mind, and some hints as to what's actually going on. And I'm sure, like, if you went through every scene and like analysed all the bits and pieces that are popping up everywhere, there probably is like so many meanings and symbolism behind all this. But yeah, I kind of like when we do the whole. It's a little bit confusing, but when in Elliot's head, like it tries to show us not only what's going on in his head, but it also tries to show us different sides that are, or different thoughts that are running through his mind. We take a short stop at Krista's place. I thought was interesting. So we're back in her office, like in this sort of library office, and it becomes clear that everything inside this is Elliot's imagination, and they are all aware at this point what he's been doing, because like Krista says, we've been trying to show you, and it's like, oh, so this is Elliot's delusion, his other personality is trying to be like, we're trying to show you something, we're trying to explain to you what's going on, that this is a made-up world, that this is not right for you. And they make this interesting point that Darlene, because I think at this point we've heard Darlene's voice a bit in the background trying to wake Elliot up, and they say that Darlene is the only thing that links him to reality, which I thought was very interesting, because in this fantasy world Darlene doesn't exist, and I am wondering why that is. Like, he's created a sort of fantasy perfect world for core Elliot, but it doesn't include his sister. And I kind of like the implication with this, that they're saying your sister's the only thing that connects you to reality, meaning that this is such a strong bond they share. Like, this bond between those siblings is so strong that Darlene is the only one who is able to, like, pull him out of this delusion, out of this fantasy, and bring him back to reality, which I like, because it basically shows us that that this is basically one of the most important, if not even the most important relationship in this whole show, is between Elliot and his sister, and how much they mean to each other, and how much they fought not only alongside one another but also for each other, and how because I think that sometimes that gets maybe forgotten a bit also by Elliot himself, how much Darlene actually means to him, and how important she actually is, and for his emotions, for his psyche, how much she grounds him. And yeah, so Darlene is the only one who like links him to reality, and he tries to like sort of wake up at this point, but Elliot is stuck in a sort of loop, which I thought was done in a cool way. Like, he tries to leave the office, goes to the door, camera swings back, and he basically just comes back into the office, which I thought was kind of cool. And then we get the sit down, we get the explanation, which I love, which I absolutely love, because again, the show isn't being ambiguous. It knows we want the answer to that one question: personalities, Elliot's personalities, what's going on. And I like that it sits us down and has Krista, the psychologist, the therapist, which makes sense, explain to us what's going on, and she lists to us all the personalities that we've also seen in Elliot's head in previous episodes. So the first personality is obviously Mr. Robot, who is the protector, which, you know, is classic, you know, D&D stuff, that you have this sort of protector personality and this sort of version of his father that he would like to have, or that he thinks he needs. The second personality is, as we've seen, his mother, which I kind of knew since we've seen her in his head, but I like that we now get an explanation for what her role is. She's the personality that is responsible for the blame Elliot has been giving himself over what has happened to him in his childhood, which I thought was quite emotional and heavy if you think about it. He has another personality. It's entirely dependent on the fact that he blames himself for the abuse and for like all the trauma and all the pain that has been going on in his life, and especially in his childhood, which would also explain why especially in his head, his mother is still very abusive and aggressive. That, yeah, he just keeps blaming himself for this. Then the third personality, we've also seen him, it's little Elliot's Kid Elliot, who, what we've seen before, handled the abuse. That also like goes in line with what we've seen in the previous episode, that Kid Elliot was the one who like had the key to like the little thing Elliot found in the museum, and who we also basically saw properly for the first time after the episode when Elliot's trauma gets revealed. So we have the episode when Elliot's trauma gets revealed with Vera and everything, and the episode after that, once he's done talking to Krista, is the moment we see Kid Elliot for the first time and they go to the museum. So that's where we see where this comes up with, like, handling the trauma and everything. Then we get addressed, which I thought was interesting. I like that they kept this up, because Elliot was like, oh, but they don't know about you. And Krista immediately goes, oh, I know about you, and looks directly into the camera. And again, it was like this sort of unsettling moment, because someone else other than Elliot is suddenly aware of us and directly looks at the camera and tells us, oh, I know you were there. And you'll think, oh shit. Like, it's this short moment of you feeling like, oh shit, I've been discovered. Our secret is out. Because, you know, as I mentioned before, there's usually this sort of secret, private thing with going on with Elliot, and suddenly everyone else is aware. Like, in this delusion, obviously everyone's aware because it's all happening inside Elliot's head. But this time, it actually gets acknowledged. It's said, I know you're there. I know you have an influence on what Elliot's been doing. I know you're also in his head. And I thought, oh shit. But I like that they did this. Like, I mentioned this in my theory video as well, that I kind of like this idea that we're also made up and that we're part of Elliot's head and his psyche. I like that. It's a very cool idea. It makes a lot of sense. And then we finally move on to the fifth personality. Well, it has already been mentioned previously. It's Hoodie Elliot. So the Elliot we've been watching ever since season 1 is another personality. It's the personality that carries all the anger and frustration. It's one of the first things we're being told when Elliot gets into therapy, that he had to go see Krista because of his anger issues and his anger management. And we've seen how upset Elliot can get when he becomes frustrated and angry with the world. And it makes sense. Like, we're told all of this in the very first episode of the show. When we meet Hoodie Elliot, we are immediately being told there are those people who I hate and fuck society and everything's bad and I'm just so frustrated and angry with the world. Like, we feel all of this from the very first episode on, and it makes sense that this is another personality that just has to deal with all this anger Elliot's feeling. And it's the dominant personality. We've been following this Elliot because he's the dominant personality. And it's just, it was so... I don't even know the word, how to like properly describe it, because that it moves on to like talk about what personalities are in control. And Elliot, like Hoodie Elliot, talks about that he wants to stay in control. He wants to stay the dominant personality. he wants to keep core Elliot in this fantasy, locked away basically. And I thought, you know, I like my boy, I like Elliot, but once you know this and you hear him talk like that, you think, is he in the right to take control like this all the time? Again, just like when he killed himself, basically, knowingly locking core Elliot away and saying, I want to live this life. I want to be alive. I want to be the one who's around all the time. And I thought, okay, yeah, fair, you know, fair enough. And I like you, but once you know that there is like a proper Elliot, you think, is this fair? Like, is this really the right thing to do? And I like that sort of, also towards the end, makes you question, okay, we've been following this guy for a while and we like him, but it's at the cost of someone who's like an actual person who's been around much longer and who's sick and ill. And you just start thinking, okay, like, is this really worth it? We like Hoodie Elliot and we've been following him for so long. But is it really right for him to like stay around and to take control like this? I just thought as soon as Elliot was like, I want to stay, I want to live his life, I immediately thought, I know, I like you to stay around too, but I don't think it's the right thing to do. Eventually, Elliot wakes up in the hospital. That's when we finally see Darlene at his bedside. She's been looking out for him, and the entire conversation is very sweet and very, very emotional. And you know, of course, you have Elliot immediately again going like, is this real? Is this really what's been going on? And again, she's like the one who has to reassure him, who's there for him, who looks out for him. And she says this one poignant sentence I thought was, which, yeah, it kind of stuck out to me. She says something like, you saved the world, Elliot Alderson. And I thought, because this is kind of the thing that he's been wanting to do for so long. This is what we're told in the very first episode. He says, sometimes I dream of saving the world. It's what Fancy Pants Elliot told us. He says, I thought of you as a kind of superhero who saves the world and who does cool things. And like Elliot's reaction to that, still Hoodie Elliot at this point, like basically tells you everything he needs to know, because the very first second he hears the sentence, he's like, yeah, I did, but then immediately like his like expression drops and you see that you can feel the thought process going on in his mind. He's like, did I though, or was it really me? And he decides to tell Darlene the truth, that he's like, I'm not really the Elliot, I'm just a part of him. And surprisingly enough, she says that she knows. As she's known ever since season 1, ever since they met again. And she says that she knew because he just wasn't really the same. He wasn't like the little brother she used to know. And she immediately kind of noticed that something was off, but she was just so happy to be reunited with her brother again, and she just wanted to spend time with him. Which I again think is so telling about their relationship. That it's so deep, that it runs so deep, and it's so emotional and important to them, that Darlene says, okay, I know that this is like maybe not the brother I used to know, but he's still there and this is all I need and I'm still looking out for him. And you can feel that Darlene is very upset about what's been going on, because she admits that she's the one who broke off the relationship, basically. And she was the one who wasn't there for him, because she didn't want to deal with the things that Elliot went through. And again, just the more you think about it, the more you realize how much this means, how much has been going on, not just between them, but also just for Darlene. If you think, okay, she's abandoned her brother. She was apparently kind of aware what happened to him, and she was just so happy to be reunited with him again, and she took into account that he was someone else and wanted to do like very dangerous stuff. And you know, both of them start crying and it gets very emotional, and it's just this entire dialogue scene was so sweet, so emotional, and very well acted. Like, it really got to me. That was the point where I started to cry like for the rest of the episode. And she talks about it, like the brother she used to know, and I like that Elliot, like still Hoodie Elliot at this point, says, I have a safe place for him. Which, even though given the fact that he kind of not forcefully, yeah, kind of forcefully took control, he still says, I have a safe place for him, because it kind of is. He's created this world for core Elliot that he knows he's always wanted. He knows where he has things he likes and wants, and where he's relatively safe and happy. And it kind of seems to make Darlene happy as well, because she nods with a bit of a smile. And when Elliot tells her afterwards that he loves her, I know it's like a simple little thing when he said, I love her, but again, it's just so emotional and shows how important and deep this whole sibling relationship is. And I like that he, as a last thing, sort of mentions, you know, he doesn't have everything, and basically implies he doesn't have you. Again, just cementing that fact that Darlene is so freaking important to Elliot and all the other personalities. And the conversation ends to like it fades to white, and then we're basically like in a bit of we have a sort of tunnel vision, and we see like, I thought there were sort of memories or pictures. I couldn't quite recognize what they were, like flying past. I thought they were memories. And then we're back in the office in Elliot's head, where we see the personalities, and we have this sort of, which I thought was very cool, we have this sort of reworking of the opening monologue we heard in the very first episode. He says, you know, we defeated the people who wanted to play God, the top 1% of the 1%. I like that this gets picked up, because I'm a huge fan of like callbacks, but it's something that gets said in the very first season, and it comes like full circle in the finale of the show. It was just great. And standing in the office, and we have a view of the whole Alderson family, of all the personalities. We see Mr. Robot, Elliot, his mother, and Kid Elliot. So at the end, we're with all the personalities, they're all together. It's the family, basically. And we have Elliot as the last one standing there in like at the window looking out over the city, and he delivers this very emotional and I thought very important monologue. Like he says so many things that really rang true with me, and I think carry a very important message. Like he says, it's important that we're being ourselves even when we're told we're different. And I just thought that is such a good message to give to people, and especially rings true with what Elliot's been going through, that even though, you know, he's always the one who's different ever since season 1, he's the one who gets told that he's not normal, that he's weird, that he's the one who struggles. Despite all that, up to this point, he's forward. He's tried to be himself. He didn't try to change, even when people told him differently, and he stood up to those people who want to destroy those that are different. And like this whole monologue Elliot delivers at the end, I thought was just absolutely wonderful. And I don't remember every single word and I can't repeat everything, but I just sat there thinking this is a wonderful final message. And we follow Elliot out the room into the corridor, and he looks at us one last time and tells us, come on, this doesn't work without you. And we sit in the cinema with the whole Alderson family, and the last shot we see is of an eye opening, Darlene looking directly at the camera and saying, hello, Elliot. And that was just it, like that ending, the eye opening, and Darlene saying, hello, Elliot. That was the moment I like full on cried. Like I had wet eyes throughout the entire like last 15 minutes of the episode. But like those final moments, like the Alderson family in the cinema and Elliot telling us that he needs us to do this so we can finish it. It doesn't work without us. And you realize, okay, this is most likely proper Elliot, core Elliot, waking up and Darlene recognizing him. And that's just beautiful. Honestly, beautiful. I'm trying real hard not to cry right now because I'm like a very emotional person. I keep saying that. I cry very easily, and I just thinking about this, like this whole last moment is absolutely wonderful, because I couldn't think of a better ending for Elliot as a person. Like, I remember thinking back when I watched season 3 for the first time, I thought the worst thing that could happen is Elliot dying at the end, or maybe even being so sick that he decides to commit suicide or something like that. But that doesn't happen. You could argue that he's happy at the end, or at least definitely in a better place than he was when you first met him. And what I also like about this final shot is that we only see the eye opening, crying a bit, and we only see Darlene saying, hello, Elliot. We never see or hear proper Elliot's face or anything. Like, I don't know, for all we know, he could look different. Like, I'm assuming proper Elliot still looks like Rami Malek, but, you know, we never see his face. And which, if you think about, even if proper Elliot does look like Rami Malek, it's quite telling, because they never show us the expression proper Elliot would have. You never know what he looks like, because I think it would be quite interesting or quite telling even if you had only like one shot or 1 second of proper Elliot's expression. And I like that we don't get that. Like, we get to think, okay, we know what this Elliot looks like, but this is the end of the story we've been following. It's, at this point, it's like the end of Hoodie Elliot, and we don't need to see what proper Elliot looks like. Like, this is left to our own imagination, basically. And yeah, I like that. That's the one thing that is kept vague at the end of this, that we don't see proper Elliot, and we can think for ourselves what he looks like, or how he would react, or whatever. But just this whole ending with knowing that proper Elliot woke up at the end of this after such a long time. And I don't want to discuss this too much, because I plan on doing like a whole discussion wrap up video where I talk about all my thoughts, not just on the finale, but like on the whole show, and now that it's ending. So I don't want to go into too much detail yet, and I know this review is quite long already. So yeah, let me just tell you, this ending, this last moment really got to me. It was very emotional, and I think it's perfect. Like, I'm definitely not disappointed with the way the show ended. which, you know, is hard. Like, many of my shows have endings where I thought, well, this wasn't necessary, or I'm super disappointed. Not with this show. They've done it in the most satisfying way I could have imagined. It's very much in line with what the show is usually done. It's subverted expectations, as you like to say. It plays with your head. It gives you a lot of like twists and turns that you don't see coming, but that still makes sense. It's not like with Game of Thrones or, you know, other shows. They're trying to do things differently and do like big surprise, a big twist or a cliffhanger, just so you have like a whoa moment, but it doesn't make any sense within the context of the show. Like, not with this though. So the way they ended it is perfect. It's very much in line with what we've been seeing for 4 seasons. And I finished this episode, this finale, crying, being very emotional over so many things, and just happy and satisfied that Elliot's story has found a relatively good ending. Okay, that's the end of this very long recap slash review. Like I said, after Christmas or like after the New Year, I will do like a wrap up discussion video, because I have some thoughts on other things as well that don't have to do with the series finale, but you know, were mentioned in the season. And yeah, I still plan on making Mr. Robot content, because I thought about doing like a retrospect sort of thing that I review previous episodes now that the show is over. Because I did review like the separate seasons back when I watched the show for the first time, but now that the whole show's over, and I just love the show and those actors so much, I would kind of like to go back and review all the episodes. So if that's something you would be interested in seeing, tell me down in the comments below. And yeah, in general, tell me down in the comments below what you thought of the finale. Are you satisfied with what's been going on? Is this what you expected, or is it not? Or are you still satisfied? Are you not satisfied? You can also tell me if you're disappointed. That I mean, I can still totally see this happening. And yeah, please do tell me all of your thoughts down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching this very long review. Thank you for sticking around this entire season, and for all the views that I'm definitely not used to. I hope you enjoyed the review series on Mr. Robot Season 4, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.